I don't know if you've been paying attention, but AI music making is getting kind of crazy. I've heard music that had good grooves, great singers, great performers, and none of it had humans involved whatsoever. The voices were generated, the instruments were generated. There's an article recently from Rolling Stone where they had them create a Mississippi Delta blues style song. And this is the kind of thing I would have thought you couldn't really replicate. Having a guy with a guitar singing soulfully. And it sounds real, and it sounds kind of soulful. It's pretty amazing, and I have to be honest, it's made me feel a little worried and insecure about my own music and the purpose and the meaning in doing it whatsoever. If computers can do it and have it sound so soulful, real, what's the point? And today I want to explore how we can make sure that our music is worth talking about, worth listening to, and interesting for us to actually even do. I recently had Jeff Leisowitz on the show. He's an author, a creativity coach, and he was a music journalist in the 90s. Picture the 90s, lots going on musically, lots of changes in the cultural landscape, and he's got to write about bands. And he said the bands that got written about were the ones that had interesting stories to them. It wasn't enough to have great music. There had to be something worth talking about with the band. And here's a little clip of him talking about a band called Bicycles.
So as a music journalist, it was always about the story of the band. How can I write about a band in an interesting way? One that I particularly remember, there was a band called Bicycle. And these were three guys, and I shit you not, they biked across the country with their equipment. They got into Time magazine with that. Not because they were a great band. It was because they were biking across the country.
So those guys had an interesting story, riding their bicycles around. You want to know more about them and maybe hear what kind of music do they make? We also talked about the presidents of the United States of America and how they used strange guitars with 3 strings and maybe 2 bass strings on another. Very minimal act, but they did something interesting. People wanted to know more about them. So what is your story as an artist, as a musician? What are you doing that's interesting, that's something people can talk about? I bet if you think about a lot of your favorite artists, they probably had some kind of story to them. When I got into the Beatles in my late teens, I read books about them and I wanted to know who they were. I wanted to know about where they came from. I wanted to know their story. And their story was really fascinating and it pulled me further into their music. Bands I grew up listening to as a teenager, like Nirvana, encouraged me to wear flannels and ripped jeans because I wanted to show that I was in line with their philosophy, rejecting what was going on in the mainstream. Even though it was the mainstream, it became the mainstream because that resonated with lots of people. What kind of story can we make about ourselves and our music so that we can share it with others and have them want to talk about it and be interested enough to listen to it? And we can use the story angle, not just on ourselves as artists, but in the creation process of the music as well. And Jeff has a great activity for us to try. That's one of my weekly music missions with the Music Production Club. And it's to try to make every part of the recording process of a song a story you could tell. Do interesting things. For example, in the podcast, we talked a bit about Led Zeppelin. They rented a castle in England, and they wanted to get an interesting guitar sound.
Led Zeppelin. They rented, I suppose, a castle in England somewhere. And they're like, we got to get a cool guitar sound. They ended up sticking an amp in a fireplace and pointing it up the chimney. And they had a guy at the top with a microphone down the chimney. 50 years later, we're talking about it.
So that's a cool story. Putting the amplifier into the chimney and recording that. Like you said, we're still talking about that 50 years later. We remember that. I love the story of the recording of The Boxer by Simon and Garfunkel. If you remember during the Lie the Lie parts, there's this huge snare drum sound. And the way that was recorded was putting a snare drum in an elevator shaft and recording it through that natural reverb that created this massive sound. How many snare drums have been recorded? But I remember that story. And every time I hear the song, I think about it and I picture it. And it makes me enjoy the song a little bit more. On Tomorrow Never Knows, John Lennon wanted his vocals to sound like the Dalai Lama shouting from a mountaintop. This creates an interesting problem to solve and cause some fun experiments in the studio so that they could get a sound like that. We could actually do some weird things like recording our guitars through chimneys, or we can have these kind of visuals in our minds when we create the sounds that we're making so that we are more likely to try something a little strange, a little story-worthy that we can use in our music. This will give people something to talk about and something to pay attention to when they listen to your music. On a recent episode of Song Exploder, the Flaming Lips talked about Do You Realize and how they made that track. And one of the things I really enjoyed about that conversation was when they talked about the vocals. They wanted the vocals to sound like a Wizard of Oz choir. Giants, little people, men, women, all singing, and they manipulated voices, they time stretched them, they pitch shifted them, and they did all this kind of fun stuff to get that feeling of the Wizard of Oz choir. And that song has been one of their biggest hits. It's got a lot of personality and character. When I think back to all of the music I've recorded, there are certain things that stand out. I don't know how many times I've recorded guitar, but there's a couple times in my mind that stand out, and it's because there's an interesting story to it. I've got a song from an album I did back in 2007 called Forest Far, and the song is Midnight Frost. And it's kind of a rock song, and then it moves to this classical guitar part. It's real quiet. And my cat Theo is weaving throughout my legs as I'm trying to record a classical guitar part. And his little collar's jangling a little bit. And it's totally audible in the track. I almost recorded over that and got it the right way, redid it. But I decided to keep it because the performance was good enough, and it had that little special magic. Every time I hear that song, I can hear Theo hanging out, trying to be part of the recording session. He's long gone now, but his spirit lives on in that song. I'll let you listen to that right here. And here's the little jangly part. I think another fun example of that was while I was recording vocals for my band, Some Good Evil. We have a song called Sheriff Jones, kind of fun, silly song. And as I was finishing up my vocal part, my dogs started barking. Vera and Audra, going nuts. And I could have, again, stopped. I could have redone it. I probably could have just edited it out and just cut that from the song. But I decided to leave it. I thought it went with the fun of the song, the lightheartedness of the song. And I'm really glad I did. It wasn't too much longer after that we lost Vera, and she's now immortalized on that song. And her bark was a big part of everything I did for all the time we had her. It's so nice to have that kind of imprinted onto the track. And maybe somebody that listens to it would know, like, oh, those are the dogs. You know, there they are in the track, and that was when he was recording vocals. It's just a little thing for people to latch on to when they listen to your music.
You have the right to remain silent.
Another fun example for me was when we were recording acoustic guitars for the album. Alex is the bass player, and we decided we wanted to record 2 different acoustic guitars played by 2 different people so they'd have a slightly different feel. So rather than do it one at a time, we set up a microphone in a figure-8 pattern, and we both sat on the opposite sides of the microphone. And we just played together and recorded it as one track. And those acoustic guitars are blended together permanently. There's no way to really separate them. And that means sometimes there's slight imperfections and mistakes, but we kept it in because we liked it. We gave it some feel, some groove, some emotion. And we did 2 tracks of that, and all we did was just switch guitars and then play our parts again. And a lot of times those guitars get spread out. And I'm going to play you a little bit of audio here. It's during a little guitar solo, and these acoustic guitars just add such a nice texture to it. And the funny thing is, the lead guitar is the main part right here in this moment of the song. But I don't really remember that part of the recording too well, but I remember sitting across from Alex, playing guitar, kind of smiling at each other and, you know, paying attention to what we're doing so we could react off each other. And I think it gives it this nice groove at this moment in the song. So some of these examples I'm talking about are actually doing things the wrong way, maybe the unprofessional way even. I think that adds some charm to your music. I don't think anyone cares if you did it the right way, if you recorded things exactly as you're supposed to. What kind of story is that? That's not fun. Everyone does that. But if you do things in a strange way and you're talking about that, now it's interesting. It's something to listen to. Well, how did that come out? How is that different than what I'm used to hearing? These are little dimensions you can give your music to make people want to hear it. You might think about misusing some of your gear. I don't think AI would put overdriven preamps into music if people hadn't done it first. That was sort of a mistake. We didn't intend to have those sounds, but people thought it sounded cool. And now it's a natural part of music to use saturation and distortion to make things have a little more energy or life. But would that have happened by AI? I don't think so. I think that was because people did it. And it's fun to go back in history and hear like who was the first person to do that. There's some talk. And now feedback, especially with guitars, is such a huge part of music. But these were people doing things the wrong way, not the perfect engineered technical way of doing things. And it's probably something a computer program wouldn't think to do because it's not supposed to be done that way. Makes for an interesting story though. Here's a simple example of how misusing your gear could be kind of fun. I got a little snare drum right here. And nothing special about that, just a sample. But I'm going to use Ableton Live's warping, and I'm going to just stretch this snare drum as far as it'll let me. So this is beyond the purpose of warping. Warping is meant to keep your tracks playing in sync without too many artifacts. But if you do it to its edge, if you do it to the extremes, you get artifacts. So this is what the snare sounds like now, all stretched out. And there are different warp modes you can try out to get different sounds. And we could even pitch this down, for instance. And now that snare's got some character. I'm going to try a different warp mode just for fun. There's some cool stuff that happens. Again, this is misusing this warp function, but it creates something new that you can play with. And it's kind of a little story. Yeah, I played around with the snare and I abused it. I did what I'm not supposed to do. I broke the rules. We like hearing about rules getting broken. And this is honestly a big part of all of my instrument creation, my Ableton Live packs. I'm almost always trying to break the rules a little bit and do something different just to see what will happen. And one of my favorite examples of that is with my micro cassette pack. I used one of these little micro cassette recorders. They sound terrible. Those little tiny cassette tapes that we had in the 80s and 90s for answering machines and those little dictaphones. I just used that in the built-in mic and recorded everything through there. And I put them into Ableton's sampler device and wanted to see what they sounded like as playable instruments. So this one I'm going to show you is made with my voice. So I want you to just hear the sample quick. That's me singing into this little tiny micro cassette recorder, and this is what the instrument sounds like. A lot of character to that. Some fuzz from this cheap cassette recorder, lots of movement. My voice isn't totally consistent, possibly because of my singing and possibly because the mechanisms aren't totally aligned on the machine, but it makes for something cool and interesting. One of my favorite packs is my 100-year-old piano pack, where I recorded my piano. It's over 100 years old, and I actually put it onto analog reel-to-reel tape as well. Now, we've all got these pristine, perfect sounding pianos recorded in amazing studios, and they're great, but they are kind of standard and everyone has them and they don't have any real character and personality to them. But listen to this piano here. That's got a lot of inconsistencies. My piano makes some weird noises at points. The tape is a little funny, but it's got some personality. And I love this piano. It really absorbs me. I feel like I'm somewhere. I'm in my living room kind of playing this thing. It's got a bit of a story to it. Again, you can say this is a 100-year-old piano in my music. And I love that kind of stuff. I want to hear what that sounds like. Now, I'm, of course, somebody that loves these kind of retro nostalgic sounds. So a VCR is big for me. I grew up watching movies on those, and they have a character to them. And this is, again, I think a good example of something that maybe AI is not going to do because it's not going to think we want something this bad. But this is from my VHS Vapor Machine pack, where I recorded a synthesizer onto the VHS tape, back into Ableton Live, and then I recorded that back onto the VHS, back into Ableton Live, and I did it one more time. So it's 3 generations of tape. And the result is this instrument. And again, I think this is a cool sounding instrument. It's been washed in VHS over and over again and comes out with some personality. What can you do the next time you're recording something to give it some of this personality, maybe some imperfections or just some interesting story? What little extra effort could you go to that now becomes a sound that people can talk about rather than just another preset you called up or another dial you turned on the computer? It's not quite as interesting as going to that extra length to do something a little bit weird to make something interesting happen in your music. Sometimes even the fun things that we do with our music happens within communities. For example, when we did January, every single January we all make a track or make some piece of music every single day. That's fun right there. What did you come up with today? People want to hear that. I want to hear what you came up with today. That's a way of bringing some kind of story into your music. I entered into this challenge to make something every day, and here's what I did on day 13. Kind of fun. With my music production club, we do a weekly music mission. And this is a prompt that we get every Sunday night that I come up with. Sometimes it's very specific, sometimes it's very abstract. You can interpret it however you like. You can use it to start a song or to finish a song, but just something to get you started, to get you thinking. And just by doing that, you're participating in a story. There's a group of people trying to make a song with a particular prompt every single week. And within our Discord, it's really fun to hear what other people do. Hey, how did you interpret this week's prompt? I want to hear what you did. Here's what I did. Here's how I went about it. And there's built-in stories to it. You decided to interpret it this way. Oh, I took it like this. I used it to finish a song. I used it to start a new idea. We've all got something to talk about, and it's generating this fun kind of looking forward to what everyone does with the prompt every single week. So you can participate in something like that where you're working with other people to solve problems, to use prompts, to use creative challenges or limitations. But that builds a story into what you're doing. I love the story of how Dr. Seuss wrote Green Eggs and Ham. He was challenged to make a story using fewer than 50 different words. And the result was one of the most popular children's stories ever written, Green Eggs and Ham. Like, it's part of so many people's childhood. And it's built off of that idea where I'm going to make a story using fewer than 50 different words. It's a great story. It gives the story of Green Eggs and Ham itself a whole other layer of enjoyment, because now you can look at it and be like, wow, that's pretty cool. There's all this repetition going on here to make that challenge work, and it serves the story of the story, and it makes the story have a story. It's another level of enjoyment, and I think that's something we want to consider when we're making our music, is not just the music itself, because it doesn't seem to matter anymore. Computers can generate really good music, and before that even happened, there's so much music going on out there anyway that it's hard to get people to listen to your music in the first place. There needs to be some kind of hook for your hook before people even get into your musical hook. And I think one way to do that is embrace our humanity and to come up with interesting stories behind the creation process. And I really think that makes it more fun to create as well. It makes you think of interesting challenges or new approaches, and it builds a curiosity into the music making process. Sometimes we get really focused on the outcome and the results, and that tends to be where I lose my enjoyment. That tends to be where I get frustrated, or I'm not inspired anymore. But when I'm trying to work within some kind of challenge, or I'm trying to do something that I've never tried before, I'm excited by that alone. And if the music comes out great, great. If not, who cares? I still had fun. And that's something I think we have to all really consider moving forward, is that if we're not having fun doing this, what is the point? Because computers can do it for us. So why are we going to spend the time doing it if we don't even just enjoy it ourselves? We have to bring the enjoyment. And I think one way to do that is to really build these kinds of stories and challenges and different angles of experimentation and trying new things into our music. Thank you for listening to the Music Production Podcast. If you want to help support the show, the best thing you can do is tell a friend, someone you think that would enjoy the show. I'd also love it if you could leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to support my work, you can go to brianfunk.com. I've got tons of Ableton Live packs, tutorials, samples. You can check out my book, The 5-Minute Music Producer, which gives you 365 short music-making activities to help you get started, stay inspired, and finish more music. And there's also the Music Production Club, where you get my latest releases as soon as they're finished. It gives you access to a community of like-minded people who are making music and sharing ideas. You can share your music, find new collaborators, and participate in our live meetings where we set up some kind of musical challenge and then make music together and share our results at the end. That's the Music Production Club. It's a lot of fun, and you can find that and everything that I do at brianfunk.com. Thanks again for listening to the show, and have a great day.